Hello everyone! This is a response video to Jimble's latest video titled, Why We Need a Pikmin Remaster So Badly. I want to first quickly say my microphone sucks and the quality of this video is gonna suck. Sorry, Jimble's videos are much better than mine. He has got better editing. Whatever. I also want to preface this by reminding everyone that Jimble is a part of my family. I love and respect him. And I'm also an active supporter of his channel. I give him money. In this response, I'm going to be critical of him. However, I don't want anyone to believe I'm attacking him in any way. This video is essentially equivalent to a comment on his video, though it's such a long script that I decided a comment wasn't good enough, and I'd rather it should just be a video. I want my personal impressions on the subject to be heard as well, because I am a Pikmin fan after all, and I have thoughts on this. I also think that Pikmin 1 needs a remaster, but I have a very different point of view. So the point of this video is twofold. One, I want to be critical of Jimble's video, but only as an indirect critique of the Pikmin franchise discussion in general. I believe discussion on this franchise could be better. This is merely just one example, as well as, of course, just being critical of Jimble's writing. But two, the second point of this video is to share my thoughts on the idea of a Pikmin remaster, which will be throughout the video, but near the end, only at the very end do I finally share my thoughts, and you'll see that when we get there. I want to play Jimble's video and comment on sections at a time. I will pause and give my thoughts as they come up. Obviously his video was 15 minutes long, so this video will likely double, maybe triple in length. Whatever. Without further ado, let's begin.
Hey, I'm Jimble. You know, I don't talk very much about the first Pikmin game on this channel.
So he starts the video with some personal insight on Pikmin 1 and his history with it. I have a similar history with the game. It was one of the first video games I ever played and is one of my earliest memories. I'm just gonna let him speak here. I'll get to my stronger points as he brings up the points that I'm gonna retort.
Which is strange considering it was the first game I grew up with, and I love it dearly. Well, here's the truth. I love the original Pikmin game through my nostalgia glasses.
Me too, Jimble. This game has clunky controls and it is riddled with glitches. Pikmin 1 was definitely a technical achievement for Nintendo when considered a step up from the N64. The polygon count, the entity count, and the physics engine are all evidence of that. It's all brand new. Unfortunately, the upgrade in game design and mechanics come with glitches. Most of these glitches were fixed in Pikmin 2, so on that specific topic, we can consider Pikmin 2 objectively superior because it has less glitches. It is apparent that both me and Jimble share the same nostalgic love for Pikmin 1, but in memory only, not in play. This is a subjective point. I'm sure other people share this sentiment.
I mean, the game itself is incredibly fun, but it hasn't exactly aged very well.
I do agree it has not aged well. However, Jimble has gone ahead and mentioned the word fun, and I'm going to segue that into an important discussion point this community they need to hear this. A game cannot be objectively quantified as fun. I hope you all know that. Here, we have to assume that Jimble means that he meant to say that him as an individual finds the game to be fun. Myself, Pikminjake, actually I don't find Pikmin 1 to be very fun. I consider it a chore to play. In this context, we're going to ignore Jimble's statement because it is a personal one, and he is not making a critical judgment based on that quantifier we call fun. I'm defining subjective versus objective discussion here because it gets brought up again later in the video in regards to something that Jimble is critically analyzing, but that ultimately nulls his argument. But we'll continue for now.
Especially if you've played Pikmin 3 or even Pikmin 2, which refined the mechanics exponentially while still being on the same system just a few years later. The fact of the matter is that Pikmin 1 is a bit on the rusty side.
So he is absolutely correct. Pikmin 2 and 3 play better because those games respond to your inputs and directions more accurately than Pikmin 1. Furthermore, these games have less glitches than Pikmin 1. With Pikmin 2 being a game released 3 years later on the same hardware, it is evident that if Pikmin 1 continued to be developed for 3 more years until 2004, it would theoretically play as well as Pikmin 2 did, so without the glitches and probably with the same style of gameplay. Theoretically.
side. And I know that some of you might be thinking, but Jimbo, just because an old game is old doesn't mean it needs a remaster. And I hear you loud and clear.
Alright, this one I need to unpack. So after stating that Pikmin 1 could be objectively better, he strawmans a hypothetical retort stating that Pikmin 1 doesn't need to be remastered just because it is old. The use of the word old muddies this. The whole discussion is muddy now. He's correct, a game should not be remastered because it's old. That is silly. But Pikmin 1 needs to be remastered because it could be objectively better. Jimbo, your point is solid. You do not have to strawman a retort. You want to get to your thesis, so just get to it.
I don't believe Pikmin needs a remaster just because it's old and outdated. I believe it needs a remaster because it's such an iconic game in Nintendo's history.
And this is where Jimbo states his video's thesis. Jimbo is saying that Pikmin 1 should be remastered for 2 reasons. 1, it could be objectively better. 2, it holds a special place in Nintendo history and thus deserves special treatment. Point number 1 is proven invalid, I completely agree. Point number 2 is interesting and it needs argumentation to back this up. If I were to make an argument to back this up, I would state that Pikmin 1 was an important technical demonstration for the GameCube's capabilities and was probably very helpful in securing investors. Furthermore, I theorize that development of Pikmin 1's game engine likely assisted with development of future game engines used in Nintendo games that followed. However, both of my arguments have 0 references to back them up. It's all theory. Ultimately, I worry that Pikmin 1 holds a special place in the hearts of Pikmin fans, more so than Nintendo themselves. This is a whole discussion of its own. It's very easy to ask Nintendo for a remaster of a game. That does not mean that they will give it to you, nor does that mean that they desire to even make a remaster at all. Nintendo's remaster of Ocarina of Time for the 3DS was quite faithful. Meanwhile, their remaster of Majora's Mask for the 3DS had a number of gameplay changes. This led to the theory, which you can look this up, that Nintendo was unhappy with the aspects of Majora's Mask and felt compelled to change it. Nintendo is the author of the work in the end, and they're permitted to do whatever they want with their art. It is perfectly possible that their opinion on the game has changed since release. It is also possible that they do not believe it to be financially beneficial to remaster or re-release a game. That's all up to their decision. We like to believe that Nintendo shares our opinions, and also believe Pikmin 1 to be special. Unless they come out and say it themselves, we cannot claim that they do, or that they even think it's special to begin with.
Yet, it's always on the back burner, a side project that lots of people know about, but haven't played.
Unfortunately, Jimbo, if the game does not sell well, or does not reach extreme critical esteem, there is very low chance of a remaster. This is why we don't see Virtual Boy titles getting any revivals. The only games that Nintendo tends to remaster are Zelda titles. In this discussion, we are disregarding ports. Remasters are defined as a technical upgrade to the original title. Functionally, the game remains the same, but it is given enhanced audio and visual improvements. The textures, the UI, and sound are recreated to function the same, but be of higher quality. There is also typically glitch removal and minor gameplay changes that only serve to remove specific archaic moments or functions. I know this is a very inherently vague description, and that's because usually the definition of remaster is changed depending on the game we're discussing. For example, if we consider Wind Waker HD to be a true remaster. However, we do not consider Pikmin 3 Deluxe to be a remaster, but rather an enhanced port. A game like Final Fantasy VII Remake is not considered a remaster, it's considered a remake because it fundamentally changes the experience. A game like Shadow of the Colossus 2018 is probably the best example of a remaster because it is essentially identical to the original game, except for the new audio and visual improvements. My point here is that without the promise of incredible sales, Nintendo is unlikely to give us a true remaster of Pikmin 1, because it simply does not do well for sales in comparison to Zelda titles. Nintendo has never even bothered to remaster Super Mario 64 or Sunshine. We would sooner see a port made of Pikmin 1 than we would see a remaster. And frankly, Pikmin does not sell well. It's sad, but it's the truth.
It's a game that, given more powerful hardware, can offer some incredible experiences. Pikmin 3 is a prime example.
I agree, Jimble. If Pikmin 1 was rebuilt in Pikmin 3's engine, it would likely look a lot like Pikmin 3. It would be cool to see Nintendo do this. It's hopeful thinking.
You can't pretend that Pikmin 3 isn't visually beautiful. Even only at 720p on the Switch, it still looks terrific.
I agree, Jimble, but not everyone will. You cannot force someone to find Pikmin 3 to be beautiful. That is a subjective quality, Jimble. You should rework your script to make it clear that this is your own opinion. This statement is minor, and I know it's meant to be cheeky, I get it, but it becomes a bad habit if you normalize this kind of language, especially in a video essay that should be it should be specific and objectively critical.
Imagine if we could have Pikmin 1, but in this modern, high-quality style, with all the quality of life improvements across Pikmin 2 and 3, and even Pikmin 3 Deluxe.
Yes, Pikmin 1 in Pikmin 3's engine would be an enjoyable experience for me. Jimble mentions that bringing over the quality of life changes from 2, 3, and Deluxe. He will go into detail about a few of them next, but I want to have a discussion on that first. There are many significant gameplay changes in the games that follow the original. One example is the use of bomb rocks. Would we return to the original game's rules? Only yellow Pikmin can carry bomb rocks in that game. Would the enemies become easier to defeat like they are in Pikmin 3? Would the Pikmin trip less? All these changes ultimately affect the overall experience of the game, and they need to be individually considered. I define a quality of life change, and this is a big one, as a change that does not affect the gameplay balance. That's my definition of a quality of life change. A quality of life change is minor, like faster menu navigation or faster dialogue delivery. The addition of auto-saving, having more save files. These do not affect the gameplay, but we do make the overall experience better. The moment a quality of life change affects the gameplay balance, it is no longer a quality of life change, and it has now become a gameplay change, and we have to understand that. Once it's a gameplay change, it affects the experience for the full length of the game. In Pikmin 3 Deluxe, they added the feature that calls all the Pikmin on the map back to the onion at sunset. You cannot call this a quality of life change by my definition because it alters how you play the game. Your Pikmin 1's difficulty was not lowered by the game's glitches and clunkiness. By fixing the clunkiness, the game is now balanced differently and would have to be adjusted accordingly. It would be an easier game.
But that's just the appetizer. I want to go deep into why I believe Pikmin is so deserving of a remaster. First up, Pikmin is a significant game.
Alright, Jimble, go on. Tell me, why is Pikmin 1 a significant game?
Not just to Nintendo and us Pikmin fans, but also to the real-time strategy genre as a whole. Pikmin chose to turn this genre from something that made the player feel like a god into something much more personal.
Okay, so yes, Pikmin 1 is significant to the fans. Yes, if you are a fan of the game, it probably means something to you. I have already theorized that Pikmin 1 is significant to Nintendo because, as I said earlier, it was a technical demonstration. But that is yet to be proven. Now Jimble is saying that Pikmin 1 is significant to the real-time strategy genre. Oh boy. While there are some RTS games that do put a player in a godlike position, that is ignorant to say that they all do, that all those games do, because that's not true. Typically, the player is actually in the position of a captain or a leader of some kind. To say that Pikmin 1 was the first game to make it personal is impossible, because there were probably a lot of people who got personally attached to the story of other RTS games, even a game like Command & Conquer, where the game directly speaks to the player in response to their actions in the battle.
You are Captain Olimar. It's you that's stranded on this planet, and these Pikmin depend on you just as much as you depend on them. That alone makes for a significantly more compelling and memorable experience.
It does? You know, the same could be said about Command & Conquer. You are the leader of the troops, and you depend on them as they depend on you.
When you lose a Pikmin, you're not just thinking about a number going down. You're thinking about losing a friend, someone who cares about you.
Jimble, not everyone is going to have the same experience as you with this game. There is the possibility that the player may not care about the Pikmin at all, and feel nothing when they die. To this hypothetical player, they do think of it as a number going down. Furthermore, the Pikmin don't actually care about the player. They are shown to have a fondness towards Olimar, but that doesn't mean that they are programmed to care about the player. They are ultimately units within a game. The same could be said about Command & Conquer. You are also given limited units in that game, and the player needs to be concise about the remaining number of units. There is a possibility that the player may feel personally connected to these soldiers, just as you do, Jimble, with the Pikmin. You cannot expect any game to make you care about the soldiers you are sending to die. However, if the individual player does begin to care, then of course it'll create a personal and memorable experience for them. Although this is a completely different genre, I have an example from a non-real-time strategy game. I played through both Fire Emblem Awakening and Fire Emblem Fates. In Fire Emblem Awakening, I deeply cared for the soldiers under my command. I did not want them to die. In Fire Emblem Fates, I did not care about the soldiers under my command whatsoever. Although the gameplay is basically exactly the same, it's up to the individual player to come to these subjective conclusions regarding the soldiers under your command. You cannot claim that this game was the first to make you care about the soldiers under your command if there's a large number of other real-time strategy games that came before it and they prove otherwise. These subjective arguments mean nothing.
In Miyamoto's eyes, one of the most outstanding elements of Pikmin 3 is how expressive they were able to make each Pikmin.
He said that? He said that? When did Miyamoto say that?
Thanks to the higher resolution and better hardware, Pikmin models can be more detailed and animated, expressing actions, including their deaths, as much as possible.
Yes, better hardware will allow for more opportunity for attention to detail. However, you are discussing Pikmin 3 right now, not Pikmin 1. You were discussing before that Pikmin 1 makes the player feel for the soldiers, but now you were implying that Pikmin 3 does it better?
Miyamoto wanted you to feel bad for losing Pikmin, so you would try not to lose them as much as possible.
He did? When did he say that? Please use quotes, because no, you need to quote him.
That sense of guilt works well to encourage the player to strategize, plan out their days, and learn how to tackle creatures. And what's great is that you don't always need to go into a fight completely blind.
Jimble is saying that essentially if the player is feeling guilty, they'll be more immersed in the overall experience of combat and survival. Okay. This comes down to individual players playing the game though. Pikmin titles offer opportunity to grow more Pikmin if you lose them, so there could be players that don't feel any guilt and do not care about losing Pikmin because the consequences aren't severe. You don't get a game over, you don't lose the mission, you can keep going. You can still get the best ending even if you lose 1,000 or 2,000 Pikmin in a playthrough.
The game doesn't force you to take your Pikmin with you everywhere. You can leave your Pikmin behind to explore alone and learn how a creature behaves.
Yes, Jimble is correct here. The player may do that if they want. I do not see how this is evidence towards your argument that the game makes you feel guilty for the soldiers.
And in the case that you do need Pikmin to interact with a creature, it's generally non-lethal. Pretty much all enemies can only attack in one direction, so instead of throwing Pikmin at the front, throw Pikmin at their back, where it's harder for them to get you.
Okay, now Jimble is describing game design philosophy. The player goes through trial and error in order to discover the most efficient way to complete the tasks set out in the game. Alright.
Avoid leaving your Pikmin to attack at the feet of a creature. Try to keep your Pikmin on the creature to gain the advantage. These are all fun and fulfilling techniques you can learn from just the second day alone.
Yes, Jimble, this is true. You can learn these strategies by playing the game. How does this relate to your thesis? And you cannot say that this gameplay is fun. I can easily retort you by calling Pikmin 1's combat not fun, because to me it's not fun. These subjective statements mean nothing.
Pikmin is full of fun and fulfilling gameplay mechanics that people often oversee because, unfortunately, Nintendo markets Pikmin as a cutesy game.
Okay, this is a strange transition. Essentially, he's saying that because the game apparently makes the player feel both guilty and fun, Nintendo markets the game as cutesy. This is true, they do market the game as cutesy. I personally also have a problem with them marketing it that way. They should advertise the title as an action strategy game that happens to have a cute mascot. However, marketing a game as cutesy does not contradict Jimble's previous statements on the game apparently giving you the feelings of guilt and joy. If you were to hypothetically claim that Pikmin 1 always makes every single player feel guilty when a Pikmin dies, and also makes every single player feel engaged and happy in every other moment, in other words, fun, does cutesy still not work as a marketing strategy? Jimble, I believe you should completely restructure your points here. I would claim instead that Pikmin 1 is a unique real-time strategy experience that involves surviving as an army of inch-tall soldiers in a forest where every animal wants to eat you. Instead of being mission-based like other strategy games, it is a survival simulator where you only have 30 days to complete your end goal of escaping the forest. The simulator aspects will assist in immersing a player into this alien world, and the strategy and combat elements may cause the player to think more critically about their actions as they progress through the game. This is my definition of Pikmin 1, and through this definition, we can see that yes, this is a unique experience unlike other real-time strategy games. We can also see that this cutesy marketing feels like a contradiction to my definition, because my definition focuses on survival and action, not feeling guilty or fun. I hope it's clear now that I agree with Jimble's objective points, and I mostly share his opinions, but in his video he has not analyzed his thesis enough and there's holes in his writing. I want to see his discussions improve because these are wonderful discussions to be had. I just think that he needs to work on his scripts more.
Oh look, they're cute plant creatures, how cute, and that's just what people think of it, so it's just shrugged off as a boring game.
It is? People do? I've talked to people that think Pikmin's a weird game. You know, I've known people who actually call Pikmin creepy, like they're scared of them, because their eyes. You cannot make a claim that about the entire franchise from the point of view of the entire video game community. That's absurd. Boring is a subjective quality. If someone thinks it looks boring, then it looks boring. I'm aware that advertising something as exciting and action-packed will have an effect on people, but it'll come down to the individual in the end no matter what. Pikmin has never sold well, and it isn't just Nintendo's marketing. Not everyone likes this game, and that's the truth, I'm sorry.
Pikmin is not only significant to me or Miyamoto, it's important as a game. A real-time strategy game that requires you to experiment and learn patterns and behaviors.
I would argue that literally any real-time strategy game can force you to learn patterns and behaviors in order to successfully complete it. Also, can we get proof that it's significant to Miyamoto? When did he say that?
Next is Immersion.
Oh, Jimbo. Oh, Jimbo. Okay, alright. Yeah, take it away, buddy.
I did cover this briefly at the start of the video, but Pikmin is just absolutely stunning.
Okay, a good-looking game does not equate an immersive experience. You can be fully immersed in the world of Super Mario 64, and it looks like Super Mario 64. I've been fully immersed in Minecraft. Does that look like reality? No.
I mean, look at this. This is a Wii port of a GameCube game. And you know what most games looked like then? This. They looked like this.
This is a very unfair comparison. I could easily pull up any Japanese game from the early 2000s and it'll look just as good as Pikmin 1. Furthermore, the player's interpretation of whether or not the game looks good is up to their own subjective thoughts. The people playing the skateboarding game may think it's the best looking game ever. You cannot force them to think otherwise.
So to then see Pikmin 3, with the true beauty of Pikmin finally realized in HD,
this is the true beauty realized in HD? How do we know? What if Pikmin 4 does actually exist and it looks way better? Wouldn't that be the true beauty of Pikmin realized in HD?
Is remarkable. It's positively gorgeous. It's fantastic. It makes you want to be there.
It makes me want to be there. Well, maybe some people. Please don't use language like this. It serves no purpose. It's just fluff.
It's so dang beautiful that it's straight up completely immersive.
No, it's not.
You can genuinely believe that this is an actual place on Earth.
Yeah, I'm sure you could. That doesn't mean it's immersive.
But like post-apocalypse. And we are tiny space people exploring it. curious as ever, and with a goal in mind.
This is more fluff. I'm not sure what this has to do with Pikmin 1 getting an HD remaster. He keeps using footage of Pikmin 2 and 3. So the next thing he's going to show us is he's going to recap the main Pikmin 3 game's plot lines.
In Pikmin 1, you're gathering ship parts for your defunct SS Dolphin. Olimar's spacesuit can only provide him breathable air for 30 days before it runs out and exposes him to, well, the planet's poisonous oxygen. So you have to get all those parts in those 30 days. That's the goal, and it pushes you to make the most of your days.
I guess it does, sure.
Then in Pikmin 2, Hocotate Fright, the company Olimar works for, is going under, and they have to find a way to pay back their 10,000 Poco debt. They realize the sheer value of objects Olimar picked up from the planet, and decide to go back to gather as many treasures as possible. This time, your goal is to, well, pay back the debt. And then there's even more content when you realize you've paid the debt, yet there's still plenty more to collect. You head back for post-game fun to get the rest. Finally, in Pikmin 3, we take a step away from the Hocotadians to focus on another advanced civilization known as Kopai.
Okay, so the Kopites and the Hocotatians are implied to be of the same origin. They are simply living on two separate planets. You can think of them as like different countries with different societies. I have a point to make regarding the Kopites, but I'll elaborate on that once Jimbo recaps the story of Pikmin 3.
This time we're playing as 3 Kopaites who need to collect fruits and their seeds to grow food on their overpopulated planet. They do have plenty of air to spare, but they also need to eat, or rather drink, so collecting fruit is not just for their planet, but also for themselves to survive.
Okay, so I'm going to go on a bit of a tangent, and I do apologize for the tangent, because I know it's unrelated, but I think this is important because it is a personal take that I want to discuss. So, then, yeah, this is not involving Jimbo's videos or his remarks. So, the Kopites running out of food in Pikmin 3 is ludicrous. Actually, the entire plot of Pikmin 3 is ludicrous. The Hocotate Freight is essentially a space trucking company. They deliver goods from planet to planet. This implies that there are multiple planets with resources and societies that require many shipping companies to deliver goods, as it is impossible to believe that Hocotate Freight is the only one in existence within this universe. That would be impossible. When Louis returns with the story of losing his load of Pik-pik carrots to a ravenous space rabbit, the other characters don't question his story whatsoever. This implies that the space society in the Pikmin universe is extremely complex and is made up of many alien planets, or at least that there's a race of ravenous space bunnies, and that's normal. We also know that, like, through Olimar's logs, that space pirates exist. This interconnected universe of alien societies is advanced, bottom line. How is it that planet Kopai could possibly run out of food? How are they not able to afford purchasing food from any of the other unknown number of planets with a potential food supply? Why don't the Kopites begin eating vegetables from Hocotate? Apparently, shipping golden carrots is normal, so if push comes to shove, Kopites would have to just change their diet. Furthermore, how is there no other alien planets that have fruit that they can cultivate? Why is planet Earth the only viable option? Why is only one ship and one crew of 3 sent on a critical mission for the entire planet's well-being? Why was no support crew sent to save them when they stopped responding or they didn't come back? The cutscene in the beginning of the game makes a cheeky comment about how a lack of food is a result of basic lack of planning. Oh yeah, real bold of you, Nintendo. You think you can sneak this into you can sneak in your little social political commentary into your game and think it's some kind of laugh. Whatever. Sorry about that. This is a potentially wonderful conversation and discussion to have, but I need to get back on topic with Jimbo. I want to make a whole video on the plot of Pikmin 3, because that's garbage.
What I'm getting at with all this explanation of goals is they help immerse you in the world you're in.
Jimbo, you were saying that an objective, the end goal of a video game, is what immerses the player? And that Pikmin is unique in this regard? This is literally any game. This point is pointless. I don't understand.
You care for these characters, you feel obligated to take action, and as a result, you find yourself in that world. Playing a Pikmin game for the first time really is a splendid experience.
This could literally be said about any video game with a story.
Now let's get a little less abstract and dive into gameplay.
Thank you.
Pikmin is a real-time strategy game.
Yes, it is.
You need plans in mind for your days.
Yes, you do.
But it's not all on the spot. You are rewarded for very well planned and efficient days with completing the game with loads of time to spare.
I'm lost. You just said that you need plans in mind for planning out your days within the game, and then you said it again. I guess you could say that you were rewarded for playing the game well, but any good video game should reward the player for playing the game well. I'm confused.
Pikmin fans often compare their lowest number of days to complete the game.
Through completing the game with less days provides no reward in-game. This is just speedrunning. I don't get your point. How does this have anything to do with remastering Pikmin 1?
But you can still easily beat the game in the 30-day limit. In all 30 days, you only have 30 ship parts to collect. So, as long as you make it your goal to collect just one part a day, you will make it through.
Okay, thanks, Jimble. Any Pikmin fan would already know this.
However, in terms of controls, the original Pikmin is a bit rough around the edges. For example, when the onion spits out a Pikmin seed, you can't pluck them for a full 5 or so seconds, which makes you feel like you're wasting time in an RTS game.
Okay, this is silly. They put a timer on the Pikmin growth for a reason. You are on a time limit. The game is balanced accordingly. Is it unfairly balanced that the Pikmin have to take 5 seconds to grow? I don't know. How come they take shorter time to grow in Pikmin 2 when there's less of a time pressure? All the design choices in Pikmin 1 are deliberate, otherwise they would not be the way that they are. Yes, they did change things in following games, but they're still deliberate in their original implication. Please understand that.
Pikmin 2 makes the sprouts pop up pretty quickly, and then in Pikmin 3, you don't even have to wait for the sprouts to pop up. You can just pluck them immediately. If Nintendo remastered Pikmin 1, it would probably be ideal for them to incorporate such a time saver and eliminate redundant waiting.
So this plays into the quality of life discussion. This is not a quality of life change, this is a gameplay change. This would affect the flow of the game. Speedruns would be faster. Yes, it would remove redundant waiting. Okay. Jimble, you need to clarify that this is what you want to see in a Pikmin 1 remaster. You are structuring your argument to say that this gameplay mechanic is a bad thing, while providing no evidence that it's bad beyond waiting sucks when you're under a time pressure. However, that was entirely the point of its original implementation.
Then you've got actions that you'll constantly be performing throughout your day, like calling and throwing Pikmin. It is unfortunately incredibly sluggish, waiting for a Pikmin to run behind Olimar so you can throw it. And then calling a Pikmin takes a solid second before they even react and run to your side. This sluggishness can be quite frustrating at times.
I agree, it can be frustrating for the player. In terms of the movement of the player character and any, lack of registration of input due to glitches, that's completely unacceptable. However, you stated earlier that Miyamoto apparently wanted the player to feel for the Pikmin and care about them. Their movements, including not keeping up with Olimar and tripping, could be argued as part of their character, could it not? Being disobedient at times could also be argued as being in line with the character of the Pikmin, is it not? Furthermore, I would actually argue that this helps with the simulation aspect of the game. This reinforces that the in-game experience is supposed to be closer to a real-life experience. If Olimar cannot currently reach a Pikmin because they're too far away from him, then logically it should be impossible for him to be able to throw them, yet in Pikmin 2 that happens all the time. The Pikmin will be way behind you, yet you can still throw them, or grab one. I argue that while an immersive experience is ultimately up to subjective opinions of the individual player, a game and a game's developer can attempt to make the experience more immersive by simulating real-life physics and logic. Jimble, under your own logic, is it not an immersive experience for the Pikmin to be sluggish and unreliable? It's just a thought.
In Pikmin 2, they made it really snappy, and then in Pikmin 3, they made it even more snappy. In a Pikmin remaster, they should bring that snappiness from 2 and 3 into the game. which would make it much more enjoyable.
You cannot say it'll be universally enjoyable, because as I have previously discussed, under your logic, the game would be less immersive and thus less enjoyable. There is an interesting discussion here about balancing simulation and more of the game elements. The more you make the experience a simulator, the less it is a game, and the more you make it a game, the less it takes place in reality. There's actually a philosophical discussion on the theory of games, outside of video games. When you enter a game, you have left reality, and the rules of reality no longer apply. The new rules are set to make the game function smoothly and accurately, and thus be an enjoyable experience. Or a rewarding experience. In a boxing match, two people are punching each other into submission, and this is allowed within the boxing match. However, outside of the boxing match, if those two people were punching each other into submission, it would not be tolerable, it would not be acceptable, they would be arrested if they're on the street. So when you look back at Pikmin 1, the game's clunkiness has been incorporated into the experience, whether it be intentional and by design or not. Pikmin 2 is more focused on action rather than the simulation survival aspects, and thus the game is faster, and it'll break rules of reality more often. Pikmin 3 simply carries on Pikmin 2's changes, likely because Nintendo ultimately did agree that it's better now as a video game and not a simulator. This does not change the fact that Pikmin 1's original design was still intentional as it was, and changing that fundamentally changes the experience.
Especially if you've only played Pikmin 3 and want to try out the original. That jump from modernized snappy controls to sluggish arcade controls is going to be a bit too jarring.
Yes, but that would be the case for any game franchise. They just released Mario 3D All-Stars Collection, and Mario 64 plays completely differently from Mario Galaxy. I don't know what your point is.
Now let's talk about battles. In Pikmin 3, they introduced throwing Pikmin at a Bulbob's eyes to stun it, which made fighting them much more forgiving. This forgiveness is definitely something I'd love to see in a remaster of the original, since many enemies can be very unforgiving. A lot of the time, it does feel like there's some level of chance involved.
Yes, I absolutely agree. This is partially due to the glitches, like the crushing glitch or zombie enemies. This should have all been fixed in the new play control version of Pikmin 1, but it wasn't.
Sometimes if you swarm a Bulbob, you'll get that bizarre instant kill, but other times you don't even seem to phase it, and it just starts eating half of your army. Couple that with the sluggish controls, and you've got a recipe for disaster. Taking from Pikmin 3 Deluxe, it would be incredible to bring some difficulty options to the original.
No, it would not. In theory, it sounds like a good idea, but Nintendo's execution and difficulty options in Pikmin 3 ended up just making the game baby easy. You already discussed this in your own videos.
A lot of people tend to find Pikmin 1 to be way too hard.
Yes, because of the unforgiving time limit, clunky controls, non-responsive Pikmin, and constant glitches.
But for some of us, the game is relatively easy, especially if we got all the quality of life improvements from the later Pikmin games.
Yes, the game would suddenly become incredibly easy if the game was adjusted to match the sequels, that's evident.
So perhaps there could be easy, moderate, and hard modes, where easy makes the game more comfortable than the original, moderate is the same as the original, and hard is more challenging than the original.
Dude, you're better off just making a ROM hack, honestly. For anyone watching, if you want a more difficult Pikmin 1, just make a ROM hack. The hacking community's gotten really good.
Just some ideas to throw out there, maybe like fewer days to get all the ship parts, enemies have more HP, and give you like fewer sprouts when collected. Hard mode could slightly tweak elements like that to make for a brand new experience for those of us who grew up with the original. Moving on from gameplay, we have music. Pikmin's music is honestly iconic.
Okay, now he's going in to discuss music. He describes Pikmin 1's music as iconic. To be iconic by definition, that means to be representative of an icon. What Jimble is basically saying is that Pikmin 1's music is representative of Pikmin's brand. Sure, I could agree to that, I guess, but that's only because I'm a fan and I know the songs. Someone who isn't a fan would not recognize the music or that it's from the Pikmin franchise. Nowhere near the amount of recognition that, like, the main Mario theme song has.
Pikmin 1 has gorgeous compositions, but the GameCube's memory limitations unfortunately hold them back. You see, instead of all music being just like a simple stream of audio, like for example an MP3 file, the songs are actually sequenced. What that means is it's practically like a MIDI.
Here he's going to compare sequence music, which is similar to the classic video game MIDI, to music that is produced conventionally. I'm going to dive right in and discuss the theoretical possibility that if Pikmin 1 Remaster occurred, whether they would remaster the music, and if they do, whether it be via a remastered sequence/MIDI or a conventional music recording. Sequence music and MIDIs are an art form of their own. There are limitations to this art form, but limitations only spawn creativity. Many of Nintendo's most well-known songs from Mario and Zelda were originally created through MIDI. The sound created through MIDI and sequence music sounds different than conventionally recorded music. Simulating a MIDI song exactly as it was through a live performance is possible, but there are some sequence music that would prove to be a little bit difficult. Take for example the Daytona soundtrack. Pikmin 1's soundtrack was written and designed around the limitations of the hardware, and ultimately the sound is quite unique because of it. For Wind Waker HD, Nintendo recreated the sequence music entirely with higher quality sound fonts. The music sequence remains the same, but the individual notes are of a higher quality. I suppose this is a route that theoretically they could take with Pikmin 1's hypothetical remaster. The other option is performing and recording the renditions of each song through Studio, which would ultimately be more of a remix, since it's not going to be exactly the same. They'll likely adjust notes or add or adjust instruments. Either way they go about it, it will not sound exactly the same as the original. I would personally prefer the route they took with Wind Waker HD, because the specific simulated sound would return. I personally do not want Pikmin 1's soundtrack to be recreated in the same style as Pikmin 3's soundtrack. They are very different. I think that they're meant for different games as well. Let's hear Jimble's thoughts on this, because he does disagree with me.
Of course, they can add a plentiful amount of instruments, so there is some control over it, but not much. It's a lot harder to fine-tune the sound. The composers need to think outside the box a bit more instead of just focusing on creating something that sounds fantastic. You may be thinking, well, Jimble, I know GameCube games that have regular streamed audio, and you'd be right. There are GameCube games with regular streamed audio, including Pikmin 2. However, when it comes to the actual area themes and playable songs, it's all sequenced because of the interactive variations. When you're fighting an enemy, drums kick in. When you're carrying a treasure, the music gets brighter. With Pikmin 3, because the Wii U has far greater memory than the GameCube, it can handle playing 4 different audio streams at once and just adjusting the volume when necessary. That's why Pikmin 3's music sounds and feels so full and alive. It's all recorded, it's all got polish. So if Nintendo brings Pikmin 1 back, they should go all out and recompose the full soundtrack.
I don't like your implication that sequence music is of a lesser quality than recorded music. I believe they should be held at the same level. It comes down to individual performances, and I don't know if you actually mean to say that it is of a lesser quality. It just comes off that way in this video. To say that a MIDI or a sequence song does not have the same polish, it honestly feels like an insult. The composers still work really, really hard to make these songs work, and these are still beautiful songs, even if they are sequenced.
There's honestly not many songs in Pikmin 1, and it could enormously benefit from modernized, high-quality versions of the songs. I won't say too much as to not spoil anything, but Pikmin 3 Deluxe gives us a few hints at how that would sound.
I mean, you're basically spoiling it. You could have cited Smash Brothers music, but even then, I mean, most die-hard Pikmin fans, I've probably already been spoiled in Pikmin 3 Deluxe's content by now, but fair enough.
The final topic I want to talk about is, well, portability.
I agree. Having games on the Switch is great because it's portable.
Pikmin 3 Deluxe on Switch is incredible. I love it. But as a big Pikmin fan, naturally I like to play the other Pikmin games as well. And to play Pikmin 1 and 2, I have to set up my GameCube or Wii.
That's a lie. You know he's using Dolphin. Don't even start.
To just have the original Pikmin on my Switch would be amazing. I don't think I've dreamt of playing Pikmin wherever I want more than since Nintendo announced the Switch. It is just so cool that Switch is, you know, the Switch, and it can go wherever you want. I really want Pikmin 1 on my Switch.
Me too, Jimble. Me too.
A Pikmin remaster would genuinely be worth $60.
No, okay, no, we cannot have that. Nah, maybe if it was from the ground up. Maybe if it was a remake from the ground up. But Nintendo needs to stop charging so much for old games. Like, if it was a port, I would be like, nah, do not charge that much.
Even if it's just the first game, not the second as well. It is still an incredible game. And if it includes everything I talked about in this video, well, it would definitely 100% be worth full game price. Anyway, I'll wrap this video up now. Thank you very, very much for joining me today. Are you hoping for a Pikmin remaster or perhaps a Pikmin 1 and 2 bundle on Switch? Let me know in the comments. I mean, who knows? Pikmin's 20th anniversary is coming up.
It's very unlikely we'll see anything for the 20th anniversary. He's wrapping it up here, so I'm gonna let him finish until the end card.
If you like my Pikmin videos, check out my Pikmin discussions playlist full of Pikmin content.
Yes, everyone go subscribe to Jimble. He's the go-to place for current Pikmin news and discussion. Go onto his Discord even. It's a lot better than mine. Mine is a nuclear wasteland. It's abandoned. Okay, so the video is finished. And I want to give my final thoughts on all of this. Going back to the beginning of the video, I mentioned that I wanted to discuss two things. The first being Jimble's critical analysis and discussion, as well as the Pikmin community's discussion as a whole. The second part being my thoughts on Pikmin 1 getting a remaster. So, starting with just Jimble's video. Jimble, I love you, and I know you were working on a schedule of getting these videos out quickly, but you definitely need some editors assisting you with these scripts. Double check that when you're arguing a point, it is an objective statement, not coming from your personal feelings. And when it is coming from your personal feelings, then yeah, have fun. That's fine. You're allowed to have personal feelings. You just don't inject the viewer with your person. You can't tell the viewer what your feelings are. You have to say them that they're yours and yours alone. Otherwise, a lot of the video is ultimately null, and that would just be a waste of time if it was. I like hearing your voice, and I like hearing your thoughts. You just need to make it clear when it is your opinion, and you also need to double check when your objective writing is sound, because there's some clear issues within this video. There's a huge difference between saying that you are passionate and you love something, as opposed to claiming everyone shares your passion and love, or everyone doesn't like Pikmin because it's boring. You know, that just kills discussion, because it's not true. Pikmin is very important to me as it is important to you. The Pikmin community is fortunately gaining traction, and they're becoming more vocal than ever before. This is good, and I want to ensure that you continue to set a good example for the community. In my opinion, you are probably one of the best people to lead the Pikmin community. I just worry that you may become too much of a hype man, and a hype man kills critical discussion. Many of the comments in the video are basically just people agreeing with you, and this is okay, but I think that if we had deeper, more thoughtful discussion, it would be better for the community overall. If we aren't critical of the content Nintendo gives us, we will continue to be mistreated by Nintendo. They will continue to give us garbage and never re-release their old games. The only thing that anyone in the comment section disagreed with you on was the $60 price tag, and this is an ongoing debate as well, and I want to do more response videos to give critical analysis to Pikmin more often. It is healthy for us to do this rather than just be yes men all the time, you know? And finally, I want to discuss the second thing and the final thing here. My personal thoughts on Pikmin 1 getting a remaster, and these are my opinions, and they're going to be a bit radical. I've talked a lot objectively regarding this video. I think it's like an hour long. But I want to get my opinions and emotions out now, because I have thoughts on this too, and I agree, Pikmin 1 should get a remaster. Pikmin 1, to me, just like you, is a special game, but it's not for the gameplay whatsoever at all, and that's why it's such a cool discussion to be talking about, should the gameplay be like Pikmin 2 or Pikmin 3? Well, to me, Pikmin 1's gameplay, it has no value. It's janky, it's broken, and I never enjoyed playing it. However, aesthetically, Pikmin 1 is a very unique experience. The nostalgia I hold for Pikmin 1 is all in the aesthetics. If Pikmin 1 was remade, I don't want it in Pikmin 3's engine. This is my opinion. I don't want it to look anything like Pikmin 3 or play like Pikmin 3 or even Pikmin 2. I actually would rather it be free from Nintendo's grasp, but that would never happen. I want it to be free from their hardware limitations because the Switch just isn't powerful enough, frankly. But I know that's never going to happen. I mentioned earlier Shadow of the Colossus 2018, and frankly, that is an extreme step up. That's the kind of step up that Pikmin 1 Remastered deserves, if it were to happen. I see the immense and amazing work that Square Enix put into Final Fantasy VII Remake. I wonder, like, what if Pikmin got a treatment like this, you know? Honestly, if we were to get a Pikmin 1 Remaster, I would want them to capture the aesthetics, actually, not of the original game, but rather the promotional art for the original game. I actually want it to be more of a survival simulation game, not an action game or a real-time strategy game. I want it to separate itself from Pikmin 2 and Pikmin 3 and remain its own unique experience like it always was. And I know, I've always been the extremist, the radical fan, my weird fan fiction, you know. My expectations are always extremely high and they're really wild. But I believe that if Pikmin rebranded itself and reinvented itself, it could have the potential to make way more money. Look, at the end of the day, when I see the promo images for Pikmin 1, I see a wonderful story that was not actually in the game. I see a story of friendship. Can a remaster capture this? Can a remaster tell this story?